All right, it's Dawn here. I took the boat out a couple days ago and tried to head off up north with a big grand plan of doing some exploring for a week or so. I am currently tied up back in the slip, as you can see over my shoulder, the neighbor's boat there. Things didn't go exactly to plan. So I think it's important as a boater, when you're kind of taking serious this boating process, to think things through, understand what happened, analyze what went wrong, analyze what happened well, kind of go through it so that you become a better boater. So if you want to share that experience with me, let's go through it. So what we're going to talk about is my plan that I had and the planning process and what went wrong with that. We're going to talk about a couple of the boat systems that gave me issues, so we'll go through that. And finally, we'll go through some, I'm just going to call them boat handling mistakes that I continue to make, that I've processed through in my brain. So I think I understand what's going on. I think I know what I need to do differently. So I'll bring that up towards the end here and we'll kind of go through that. So planning, systems, and boat handling, all issues that we need to talk about. So let's dive in. I've got a cup of coffee. You get one as well. And let's just do it. Okay, so let's talk about the plan first of all. I have the Wagoner guide down there and the galley, and I've studied that thing. And the first kind of chunk of it, the compendium at the beginning, talks about planning your trip and having a go, no-go checklist. You know, did I check this? Are we good to go? Did I check this? Are we good to go? I've always boated on lakes and reservoirs back in the mountain states, so I haven't really had to get that go, no-go thing ingrained in my brain yet. But I will from now on because of what happened. So let's talk about the plan first of all. So as you can see from the map here, what my grand plan was to leave Shilshole here and basically just make my way up to the San Juan Islands. I figured I'd probably stop and get fuel in Anacortes and maybe groceries or whatever if I need it, and then, you know, kick around in the Gulf Islands for a bit, San Juan Islands, Orcas Islands, that area. Okay, so the reality of the situation, the way the plan really worked out, was I started out by fueling the boat up at the fuel dock. The winds were calm. That was not too big of an issue, although that boat handling thing that I want to talk about will come up at the end, played out there. And then I headed out and headed north, and I filmed a little bit of that part of the passage, but my plan really was to, you know, save all the good footage for once I got up there in the pretty country around the islands, and there was more to look at than just the ocean. So anyway, I wound up kind of motoring from about 2 in the afternoon till about 5:30, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, something like that, and wound up going through the Port Townsend Canal and just anchoring up there by Port Hagland, I think it is, and anchored for the night there. Now, the anchoring process went okay, but I'll explain a little, I'll chop in a little bit of what I filmed up here and explain the one issue I did have with the anchoring.
All right, well, it's getting a little dark, so I don't know if you'll be able to see me or not, but we are anchored for the night. Where we went is up along towards that Flagler Fort. It's behind me. We didn't quite make it there, but we came through the Port Townsend Canal, and right as we came out the mouth of it here, there's a bunch of boats anchored here. There's a little harbor over here. I don't know what that is right off the top of my head, but we are anchored for the night. So far, we seem to be holding just fine. I'm going to hang out for a while and make sure. I'll probably sleep with one eye open and set an anchor alarm tonight, but because it's a little windy, we do have a mountain kind of in front of us there. Again, this is probably not the best view in the world, but we do have a little bit of a hill in front of us there to hopefully break up the worst of it. I was going to go over there where there was more sailboats, but the wind was really kind of whipping through. There's a little cut over there. So anyway, we motored for about 5 hours roughly and did about 30 miles. So I'll go down and check the fuel tanks and see, kind of crawl way back in the back and look at my side tubes and see how much fuel we used for that much, so we can start to get a handle on that. And I'll go fill out the logbook and make me some dinner, and in the morning we're gonna continue on north up towards the San Juans. Oh, I forgot to tell you, there was one little issue when I was anchoring. The anchor is hooked to a big chunk of chain, like around 20 feet or 25 feet or something like that. And then from that point on, it's tied to rope, and the rope then, was the rest of it. So the windlass is playing the rope out just fine, and I've dropped the anchor out way up there, and we're backing down, letting the wind just push me back because the wind was blowing pretty good. And all of a sudden, the anchor windlass stopped playing out any rope, and what it had done is there was kind of a loop or two down in the bottom in the anchor locker where the rope had kind of looped around itself, and that loop came up and jammed in the hole, and the windlass was playing it out, and so it sucked it up in there nice and tight. Luckily, I had enough anchor out to it had set by that point, so we were holding good while I ran around with a hammer and a stick and pounded that stupid knot back down out of the hole. But yeah, we're tied up for our first night of anchoring, and I probably won't sleep a wink. I don't know, we'll see. The wind's dying down right now, and I haven't looked at the wind predict wind app to see what it's supposed to do tonight. When I was looking, it looked like most nights it kind of calms down, and that's what it's been doing in the marina, is it calms down in the middle of the night, to just a breeze. So yeah, so far so good. Now tomorrow we'll continue on up. We've made a good chunk of time, and made a good chunk of this towards the San Juans, so might just make it all the way up there to those tomorrow or the next day and poke around up there for a few days. So there you go. So the anchor held all night, despite the wind, and the one thing I did notice is the guy that was anchored next to me looked like he was on just total chain. And I'd look out the window, and we'd be just swinging back and forth, and he'd be not so much. He was turning in and out of the wind a little bit, but he wasn't making those big wide sweeps that I was. And I think that's a function of having more chain. I think you've got more weight of the chain, and it wants tendency to hang straight down and lay on the bottom more and kind of keep you from making those big swings back and forth. So that's another kind of reason I think it would make more sense to have a couple of 100 feet of chain on this thing instead of a shorter chunk of chain and then transitioning to rope. But after I got the anchor up, I headed out and started out into Admiralty Inlet with the thought in my mind that I was just going to kind of cross that body of water and hug the Whidbey Island coast up towards Anacortes up there. But that's when I really got out there, and the wind was crazy. Well, I mean, it was blowing hard, and being big open body of water like that, it was kicking up some pretty big waves, and it was just not the place to be for me. All right, well, I thought I'd give you a quick update on the trip here. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and we pulled up our anchor, left that Port Hagland, I think it was, area, and the idea was to go up north, which go around Port Townsend, which was, we were pretty close to Port Townsend anyway when we anchored, and then you have to cross Admiralty Inlet, which is the big main inlet coming in off of the ocean, and the wind just really got crazy on me out here. So I got out there, and I was going with the wind most of the time, but had to kind of cross and go at a little bit of a 45-degree angle to it. It was getting pretty sketchy, pretty uncomfortable ride, and the stuff was starting to fall over on the boat. So prudence being what it is, or caution, whatever, I turned around and I made my way back south. Right now I'm in the lee of this island, Marrowstone Island, I think it is. Marrowstone Island, according to the chart, which is the island that I kind of came on the other side of it up through that canal, the Port Townsend Canal. So I came around this on the inside of it, west side. So I'm just kind of putting around here now in the lee of this island. The predict wind forecast and the windy app are all saying that this wind is supposed to die down in an hour or so. So I might have been just a little early getting out, but it's blowing pretty hard. It's harder than it was last night. So not a great time to be out poking around out there. So the boat's handling it just fine, but I just started thinking, you know what, this is kind of silly. There's no reason to be doing this. And I've always, heard people say you boat when the weather's good, not when the schedule is good, and I'm not really on a schedule. So I was like, well, what am I doing here? So anyway, I'm just gonna kind of chill here in the lee of this island. It's nice and flat here and we're out of the wind, so we'll give it a little bit. I can see straight across from me, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but there's a big cement plant or something over there in the Port Townsend area that's blowing a bunch of steam off. And so I'll be able to watch that and see if the prediction comes true and really do lose this wind in a little while. So if not, and it continues to do this, this might be not a bad place to drop the anchor again if I have to, but we'll see. There's a little inlet in here into Killissoot Harbor, and it says you should only go in there in high tide. It's a pretty shallow little channel that kind of winds around going in, and I'm sure that'd be nice sheltered water. I'm just not sure I want to do a little narrow channel when the wind's blowing crazy like this, and even if it is high tide. So anyway, just gonna put the trip on pause for a little bit and let this weather sort itself out, and then we'll see what happens. So I'll come back and give you an update when there's something to update you on. Again, I'll chop in a little bit that I did film while I was up there. I spun around, I came down, hung out in the lee of that island for a little bit, and while I was there, I was just making the decision that it's time to turn around and head back. So I turned around and retraced my steps back to the marina, got tied up, and that's where we are now. So that's how the plan started out, transitioned, and ended up with us back here. There's the end of our planning process. So let's talk about boat systems that gave me issues. Okay, so we know that I've done the house bank upgrade to lithium batteries, and that all worked out fine. The batteries held up really well overnight, and I cooked on the induction cooktop, and that didn't suck them down, and so I had plenty of reserve power just fine. I had two issues that really popped up that were, I'm embarrassed to say I should have understood before I left that I had those issues, but I didn't. So lesson learned, I didn't check everything out. But here's what I found. When I disconnected shore power, when the furnace would try to kick on, it's not getting enough voltage or something's going on. It tries to start, and then there's a kind of a relay that's kicking off and it shuts off, and it tries to start and shuts off. So I couldn't use the furnace. And it's still getting down in the 40s at night or even in the high 30s. So that was pretty dramatic thing that I wanted to have that I didn't have was heat. So the furnace is an issue. I got to resolve that. But at one point when I figured that out, I thought, well, I do need to get the generator started. So I went down, made sure the seacock was open for the generator, and came up here to start it, and nothing. I mean, it's not even clicking. Now, that's on me that I didn't test the generator before I went out after all this work got done. Now, I'm not sure I want to blame the guys at S3 Maritime. I'm not sure they did something wrong, but I got to do a little troubleshooting on that, and then we'll understand what's going on. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I don't know, but I'll have to sort that out. So no generator and no furnace. The batteries held up fine. Like I said, I was able to cook on the induction cooktop my dinner and cook coffee in the coffee pot in the morning, and the lights and the computer. I got a couple of emails I had to respond to while I was up there and so forth. So the house bank seems to be just fine and seems to be handling our load just fine.
However, I don't know how it would have held up running the furnace. When I've run the furnace here, I've been watching the Victron controller to see how much juice it's using. But obviously, if it was wanting to run off a shore power outlet, then I don't know if I'm getting an accurate reading there. So got to sort that out. And then the other thing that was a little annoying, not a major failure, but pretty disappointing to me, was the camera system that I put in. I think I mentioned before that the two displays that I mounted, one up here in the lower helm up above the helm station and one up top, they actually run off a little 110 volt transformer, that plugs into a power strip. So I've got those plugged into an outlet that's up on that upper helm. That outlet is apparently not hooked to the inverter, because when I shut off shore power, I lost my monitors. So my camera system wasn't working. And again, what I wanted to use that for was to be able to watch behind me while I was underway, watch the docks as I was pulling up to the docks, watch the engine room while I was underway. Couldn't see anything with them, so that was pretty annoying. So I gotta fix that outlet, make sure it's on the inverted stuff. So that's really the things that happened with boat systems. Nothing, that put me at any danger or any risk, I would say, but some annoying things and things that I was kicking myself going, man, Don, you didn't prep properly. You should have known that your generator wasn't going to start before I got up there. So I've learned my lesson about checking out my systems. And just for those of you who've been following along and you're like, geez, man, why have you been spending all this time working on this boat? This is why you fix up all your stuff, is because when you get out there and the wind turns against you or whatever, that's when you got to have your stuff working. So those were my system issues. So let's talk about my boat handling issues. Okay, boat handling. So boat handling is an art form. And I'm serious when I say that. I believe that it's really important to kind of be competent at moving your boat around. Out on the ocean, it's no big deal. You're just driving, right? It's when you come into marinas and up to fuel docks and places like that, where there are other expensive boats to bump into, that things get serious. And I have been using twin engine boats before I bought this one. So my last boat was a 32-foot Sea Ray that had twins on it. And I felt like I was doing a pretty good job every time I was parking that thing of using the engines. Again, I got to set my coffee down so I can explain this, but you wind up, there's a spot where I can set it. You wind up using your engines opposing each other to, spin the boat around. So essentially what happens is you can stop the boat in the water and you can put let's say your starboard engine forward and your port engine reverse, and you can spin the boat counterclockwise on kind of on the center of its axis pretty much. Now this boat does have a bow thruster, but the bow thruster control is only up on the upper helm. So that puts me up high above rope handling areas and so forth, and so that's not optimal. So, but anyway, so as I'm coming in back into the marina, or as I'm going to fuel up, what I'm doing in my mind is I'm thinking the situation through ahead of time, and I'm planning my approach, and I'm planning what I'm going to do, how I expect the boat to handle, what I think the wind is doing. Don't really have currents to deal with inside of the marina here, but you got to take all that into consideration. And so what I keep finding is I seem to be making a mistake. So let me explain what's happening. Let's say I'm pulling up to the fuel dock. So I come out of the slip and I head north, and as I come up to the dock, I have to make a right-hand turn to get lined up with the fuel dock, and then basically kind of ease myself up against that dock. And I was coming into the fuel dock and there wasn't much wind, and I thought this is going to be a pretty simple approach, and the gal came out to grab a rope, but the stern of the boat was still kind of pushing out away from the dock. And I was just, kind of annoyed with myself, and I was like, well, she's right there. She's got the nose tied off, the bow tied off, and so I was close enough that I could kind of hop off with the stern line and get the stern tied up. But I didn't feel like I did a great job of docking up against the fuel dock. I didn't think too much about it. Got all fueled up, untied, headed out. Off we go, no big deal. So comes time to come in and tie this thing up. Now my stress level's a little high anyway because I've had to deal with the morning's antics up there in the small craft advisory that was being broadcast on the radio for the Admiralty Inlet that I was in the middle of. So my stress level was a little high anyway, and the wind was blowing out of the south still. So my plan was I'll come into Shilshole from the south around the breakwater, turn back to the north. I have to just come in a little ways, and I hit the end of A dock here where I'm at. And then I basically have to kind of turn almost a full circle. So I turn a right-hand turn and a right-hand turn again and a right-hand turn into the dock or into the slip. Tie up on the starboard side. So what I'm doing is I'm coming in as I'm operating the boat from the upper helm station because I do want to have the bow thruster if I need it. If the wind's blowing me around, I'm not making my corners. But it's not. I don't need the bow thruster. I didn't wind up using it. But I wound up coming in, and usually what I would expect to do is, and I'll see, maybe I can put some graphic together to show you this, but I would expect to pull myself up, make the first corner, parallel the slip as I'm coming past it, make the second corner to get basically lined up with the opening of my slip, stop the boat essentially there, center the helm, use the engines against themselves to turn 90 degrees, and then pull straight into the dock. That is not what I did. What I did was I made one continuous corner out of it because I was coming around, and it was like, oh, I'm going to line right up on the slip. I'll just continue the corner. So I did two things that kind of caused me grief. I moved from the upper helm station down to here to the lower helm station, because then I can go right out the door here and get to the lines. And again, if I assume I'm coming in by myself, I got to be able to get a line on a cleat pretty quick there. So I came down to the lower helm station. And then I have one more boat issue that I didn't mention earlier when I was talking about boat systems, is the starboard engine shutoff switch. The button that's the kill switch for the engine does not work. So the previous owner, what they have done is they've had the throttle adjusted so that you can shut the engine off by pulling the throttle all the way back. And that's not optimal. That's happened to me twice. I've accidentally killed that engine in the middle of close quarter navigation and trying to maneuver, and all of a sudden I kill the engine. And then that creates kind of this chain of reaction of spiking heart rate and more stress, because you got to get that engine back into neutral. You probably didn't have it in neutral because you thought you were driving it. And then you got to kind of get the throttle back up there to where it's startable. The oil pressure alarm is now going off because the engine's quit running, and so we have no oil pressure, so that there's an alarm going off. And then you got to get the boat started again. Well, that does quiet the alarm right away, but it's I won't say panic, but it's close to it there for a minute while your brain has to stop focusing on where the boat's going and what you're doing in the water and change gears and think about, okay, let me get this thing started again. So that's going to get fixed. I am not going to have that continue to happen. But secondly, what happened is I left the rudder, I think, turned to starboard to make that corner. Because as I was pulling into the slip, same thing that happened at the fuel dock, the stern of the boat started to go away from the dock. And I in my mind at the time, I was going, wait, why is the stern going out? The wind's from the south. If anything, the stern should be being pushed against the dock harder than the bow because it's bigger. Well, again, I think I left the rudder in that turning position. So as I was kind of using the engines back and forth, anytime a prop was spinning to push us forward, it was also pushing the ass end of the boat to port. So, lesson learned on the boat handling. I got to remember to center the helm and work off the engines without the rudder being at some angle. Or if anything, as I pull in and I want, and I'm down to the point where I'm barely moving and I'm trying to kind of fine tune my approach, it would probably make sense to spin the wheel to port a little bit so that any forward motion off the prop is wanting to push my stern into the dock. Thinking it all through now makes perfect sense, and I see what I did wrong, and I'm hoping that in the future I can remember that and not do that wrong again. I also, though, do think it's going to be worth the money to pony up and do the stern thruster, because in addition to having thrusters at the bow and the stern so I could push any side of the boat around that I need to, I would also be able to get handheld remote that I could run the thrusters from down here, or even standing out on the side of the boat, like reaching down to grab a rope, I could push the boat over a little bit if I needed to. So boat handling, it wasn't a catastrophe. I didn't crash into anything. I got the boat tied up. One of the neighbors came over and grabbed a rope and helped me get tied up. And again, I was able to jump off and get the stern tied up. So it all went fine. It just didn't go really well, and I did some things wrong. And I think it's important to understand what you're doing wrong so that you get better at this. So there you go. I'm not scared of going out again. I don't feel like I put myself in any risk. The boat was handling the big seas just fine. It's very stable. It's heavy. It was plowing through the waves without too much trouble. I mean, we had water splashing all over the place, and a couple of times when we were at angles to the waves, a few things got knocked around inside of the boat here that I didn't have fastened down well enough. But that part was all just fine. And second of all, I do feel like I got a much better handle now on kind of how far you go in a given period of time at a good, respectable cruising speed that's economical and so forth. So I feel like I can do this trip again, and with better planning, I think it will be more successful. And then once I kind of make that crossing of Admiralty Inlet, which is the opening to the ocean from the Strait of Juan de Fuca there, that's kind of, they call that a gateway. You got to kind of get across that at some point in time, or you have to go up behind the would-be island and either go through Deception Pass or go through another canal up there. But I'll do it again. I'll just do it better next time. In the meantime, I'm going to focus on getting these boat systems sorted out. The priority being making sure I know what's wrong with the generator, making sure I know why the furnace won't run when we're not hooked to shore power, fixing my displays so that they work no matter what. And then I'm probably going to have to get a mechanic on the boat to fix this kill switch and fix this throttle. And I've also had a couple issues with the tachometers. Once in a while, the tachs on the upper helm just stop working, and so I don't know if I got loose wiring or if I got a tachometer sending unit trying to die or something, but a couple minor little things that need to be tuned up on the instrument panels, but everything else went just fine. So there you go. I hope maybe if you're a boater like me, my kind of lessons learned will be helpful, and you can take some of that to heart and kind of remember, watch somebody else learn a few painful lessons and not have to go through them yourself. So I will wrap this up for now, and next time you see me, I'll give you an update on what happened with these boat systems.